Before we invite the first speaker up to the podium, I would just like to contextualize the migration and ethnicity a little bit. Last year we had this conference on migration and identity, and ethnicity is very much correlated and very much tied to identity. But when you talk about ethnicity, we want to highlight the focus on your cultural belonging and your ancestry. So think about your origin, and then also as you are carrying your family's history with you. Again, we have numerous times today said that we are here to act, we are here to contribute, and we are here to learn. And we're also putting a focus on the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And we are focusing, again this year, on number 10, which is the reduced inequalities, 11, sustainable cities and communities, 13, climate action, 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions, and number 17, partnerships for the goals. So again, people are moving. They're bringing their self into their new reality. We want to also just think about, like, how does that work when you bring your ethnicity and your cultural heritage to a new place? Is it weakened? Is it strengthened? Who holds it with you? What happens to the society and the community that you actually move into? Those are big questions to ponder. One of the people here today is known as a European, I have heard. His name is Thorbjørn Jagland, and he is going to talk to us today about global perspectives on migration and development. Thorbjørn Jagland is the former Secretary General of the Council of Europe for 10 years. He's been the Prime Minister of Norway. He's been the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the President of Parliament. He is the former chairman of the Nobel Peace Prize Committee. He's been a board member of the Heyerdahl Institute for 7 years. Mr. Jagland, we welcome you to the stage.
Ambassador Corman, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very glad to be here today, in particular in the residence of the Turkish ambassador. During my last 10 years in Strasbourg, I had a lot to do with Turkey. I traveled there again and again, met with your President Erdogan. How many times I can't remember. And I saw good things and problems, but I remember one thing which is related to the theme here. Namely, I traveled to Hatay, the city at the border between Syria and Turkey. And there I could see actually what happened in Europe, or what did not happen, because what happened was that Turkey took responsibility for 3.5 million refugees. And I have to put it bluntly because I'm a politician. Because of the wars that Europe contributed to. And Europe asked Turkey to take care of many of the refugees. And in this city of Hatay, I visited a camp for all those people that came from Syria. And the Turkish government had given them a credit card. And the government had put money on the credit card so that the people were not dependent on receiving food and other things from the outside. They could go to the shop in the city to buy what they needed. So this is a new approach which I felt was very, very important. And at the time, it was also extraordinary. Now, I'm not going to speak about the issue here from the point of view of being an expert, because I'm a politician, and politicians, they our role is to say what is going to happen and afterwards explain why it didn't happen. It was actually Winston Churchill that said it. But during my years in politics, and in particular the 10 years in Strasbourg, I saw two things. One is I already touched upon, namely the flow of asylum seekers, migrants, and also the increasing tensions that it created, and the fact that all this was exploited politically. So today we can say, I would like to say this is the most dangerous development we have, namely that so many politicians are exploiting the problems related to migration and asylum seekers. And that a growing number of people are looking upon the others as a threat to themselves. And a problem here is that we tend to say that our identity is solely linked to our ethnicity. And therefore, other ethnic groups, they become a threat. Other religions become a threat to us. Whereas I think it's true what Amin Malouf said. He was the first, by the way, he had the first Thor Heyerdahl lecture many years ago, and he had and also his book later on about identity and ethnicity is a masterpiece, and the speech which he made here in Oslo, the same. And what he said is that we have to realize that we do not have only one identity. We have several. All of us have several identities. But the problem of today's world is that more and more people think that they have only one identity and that they have to protect it. And the others that have a different identity become an enemy or a threat to themselves, to their own ethnicity and to their own religion. Now, why did I say yes to sit at the board of Thor Heyerdahl Institute that was established back in, when was it? 1999, yes. It was because Thor Heyerdahl fascinated me very much. And I had experienced during my many positions in politics, and during all the years I worked with international politics, and I visited countries everywhere. And what I discovered was that if you wanted to have a good conversation with a political leader, you had first to speak about Thor Heyerdahl. Thor Heyerdahl was the most famous Norwegian at the time and still is. Everywhere, when you are going to, when you speak with other people and you mention Thor Heyerdahl, then you have created a good mood immediately. And of course, as a young boy, what fascinated me was his courage, his imagination, and to set out at the mercy of the Pacific Ocean to prove that people in Polynesia came from, was it from the west, east, or the west? I don't know, but he did it in order to, to prove that people came from the east and not from the west. Because he had looked at the winds, and the wind always came from the east, so people must have come from the east. And I remember one, I think it's a quite famous quote of Thor Heyerdahl, which tells a lot about him. He was asked by a student, Mr. Heyerdahl, who discovered America? Was it Leif Erikson or Christopher Columbus? And of course, this was a Norwegian student. And he wanted to hear that it was Leif Erikson. And then Heyerdahl replied, ask those who were on the shores when they came. So he had this ability to look upon the world from the eyes of the others, and also to put questions on conventional wisdom, which I think which fascinated me a lot. So what he actually did was to tell us that migration has always been there through history. We have always had migration. I think that was the main story behind the Kon-Tiki, the fact that he proved that people came from South America, from the east. And, well, they may have come from west and east, but the main thing was that migration had taken place over the borders and over the oceans. And he also told us that people, therefore, have mixed during the years and centuries, and that this mixture of people is actually the essence of human advances. Without this mixture of people from different parts of the world, without this migration, we wouldn't have had the same knowledge as we do have today. And without Thor Heyerdahl's ability to put questions on conventional wisdom, probably the globe had been flat still. Now I'm going to speak as a politician, and I have to really speak straightforward, because what is happening today is absolutely a catastrophe. During our history, migration has been caused by poverty or wars or environmental changes. I said or. Today we can say that migration is caused by poverty and wars and environmental disasters. This mixture is very, very dangerous. And I'm really sad to see that we have world leaders today that the best thing they have thought about to cope with this dangerous cocktail is to start a new war, or not to avoid it. I mean, the first thing political leaders should have done today is to come together and focus on the most dangerous development, namely climate change and poverty. But it hasn't happened. And the UN has said that now the number of migrant people has passed 100 million. Refugees, migrants, and internally displaced people, 100 million people. It's a disaster. And why did it happen? I've already said it, but all these wars, and not only that, we have 100 million people as migrants and refugees and internally displaced people. But international law has been undermined year by year. I have seen it from when I was foreign minister and head of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Norwegian Parliament, and in Strasbourg for 10 years. In particular, the last 20 years, international law has been undermined by in particular the big powers. And that's why we are here today, to talk about migration and the problems, and not only the good things about migration. Look at what happened. I mean, the last war, the war in Ukraine, is a blatant cheating on international law. I never seen something like that. That a European country, we like to talk about Russia as a European country, is attacking its neighbor with 40 million people, trying to occupy it. It cannot be worse. I mean, but this is not on. I mean, if you look at the last 20 years, what has happened? Because this is not the only example. For instance, the war in Iraq, which was, I mean, the invasion of Iraq at the time did not have any authorization of the UN Security Council. And I would like to, I mean, we have to remind ourselves, what kind of world order did we get after the Second World War, or the two wars? And it was actually one war. One disastrous war, world war. Why did we get the new international order? The international order that existed before 1945 was based on the peace in Westphalia in 1648, which said that, stated that the unlimited role of the nation state. Nation states should do what they were allowed to do, what they wanted to do internally, and nobody should have the right to put a question to that or action to that. So the sovereignty of nation state was the order that was established after the religious wars in Europe that lasted for 30 years. And there were no other ways to say that the new order must be based on the sovereignty of the nation states. And actually, this was the birth of nation state in Europe. The Netherlands became an independent state. Switzerland, the West Roman Empire dissolved, and we get a number of German nation states. So this was the birth of nation states in Europe, which was good. But we also got nationalism, which led to two wars. And after the war, political leaders said that we have to move away from this world order based on the sovereignty of the nation state. We had to move towards a kind of internationalism. And therefore, we got the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which, of course, was a huge limitation of the freedom of the nation state, because now all nation states had to observe or to guarantee certain rights for every people. And then we got the UN Charter, which went even further. And today I think it's important to read what is in the UN Charter. In the chapter about the Security Council, it is said that the Security Council, which was established, shall have the responsibility for peace and stability in the world, and the 15 members of the Security Council act on behalf of all the other member states. This was revolutionary words. 15 members got the responsibility for peace and stability, and they should act on behalf of all the others. And in Article 25, it was said that all the member states of UN should implement the decisions by the Security Council. Why do I mention this? Because some members of, and we know it from George Orwell, some pigs are more equal than others, and actually the big powers in the Security Council, they didn't act on behalf of all of us. They started to act more and more on behalf of themselves. This is why we are here, in this crazy situation. With all the wars during the last 20 years, the Americans didn't act on behalf of all of us. When they invaded Iraq, they acted on behalf of themselves and started that terrible war, which led to experts. The assessments of the experts differ from 500,000 people dead or 1 million people dead, civil war for 20 years. And how many refugees? How many migrants? How many displaced people? Later on, the Libyan state fell apart. There is no Libyan state today because we bombed it. And when people are dying now on the way of the Mediterranean, it is because human traffickers send people out in dangerous boats on the Mediterranean, and nobody can control it because there is no state. And to seek for regime change and killing the head of state of Libya was not in the UN Security Council resolution. And now we have the war in Ukraine. 4 or 5 million more refugees. But because of this disastrous development the last 20 years, as I've told you, Turkey had to take care of 3.5 million refugees. But what did we do in Europe? Well, we have more or less left the problem to some states surrounding the Mediterranean and asked Turkey to host 3.5 million of them. And many are now on the Greek islands, and they have stayed there for many years. And new people are coming over the Mediterranean to Italy and to Malta, which is now sparking political turbulence in Italy. Very, very dangerous. And what we are now witnessing is that the international order has been undermined year by year. And if you look at the Refugee Convention, the UN Refugee Convention from 1951, what does it say? Well, there are two principles. One, no pushbacks. No refoulement. No pushback. It's totally forbidden. When a person comes to a border and asks for asylum, you cannot push him or her back. It's totally forbidden by the UN Convention. And the second point is that he or she has a right to get the application handled by the authorities. You don't necessarily have the right to get asylum, but you have the right to get the application handled by the authorities, and no pushback. But pushbacks are taking place every day now in the Mediterranean. And European countries are competing on building new walls and new fences. We don't only have the fence in the Middle East. We have it in Poland. We have it talk about it in Finland. So many places we are building new walls, which means that we are undermining the UN Convention on Refugees. And this is, as I see it, a complete disaster for Europe, which was based on the European Convention on Human Rights. I was responsible for the convention for 10 years, and I saw it, how it was undermined, not only the Refugee Convention of 51, but also... And it is a contrast to what happened actually, and this is very important to recall, to what happened after the First World War. Hundreds of thousands of people became stateless. And therefore we got a Nansen passport, which 50 states ratified, which meant that the stateless people after the First World War could travel over the borders of 50 nations. They did this to handle the consequences of the war they have started. Those who lost and those who won did the necessary thing. And as I was told, the Nansen passport was ratified by 50 nations at the time. And hundreds of thousands of people were rescued because of this. After the Second World War, we got the UN Convention on Human Rights, and we got the UN Convention on Refugees, which said, as I said, no pushback, no refoulement. And after the Second World War, 400,000 people also became a particular group, namely the so-called Volksdeutsche. 400,000 people became stateless because they have lived in the areas which Hitler conquered, and they have to move away after the war. 400,000 people. In 6 months' time, all these people were resettled in a Europe that was a total disaster. But they had the ability to do what was necessary. What is happening today? We are not able to clean up after the wars that we participated in, and we leave it to several countries surrounding the Mediterranean Ocean. So I think this is a real disaster for international law. Now, and this is, of course, why we also are talking about ethnicity and identity. This has become the main topic. You can see it in the United States, you can see it everywhere in Europe, that this is the main political topic now. Because more and more people, as I've said earlier, are regarding the others, those who do not belong to your own ethnic group, your own religion, as a danger, as an enemy. And it is becoming more and more dangerous everywhere, I think. That's why we need to talk about it. So I will sum up by a few points. One is that I think that we have now to speak about the necessity of compromise. More and more we see the opposite, or what the former U.S. President Calvin Coolidge, He was a very religious man, and he went to church every Sunday. But his wife, she didn't want to go along with him. She was not so religious. And one Sunday, Coleridge came back home, and his wife asked, "What did the priest talk about today?" And he said, he talked about sin. And then the wife asked, "What was his opinion about sin?" And then Coleridge said, "He is totally against it." Unfortunately, this fundamentalism is growing, either or. So I think it's better to listen to what Fridtjof Nansen said about the same theme, because always been a question here in Norway: should you go to church on Sunday or should you go skiing? And Fridtjof Nansen said, "Well, I propose a compromise. It's better to go skiing and think about God than to sit in the church and think about skiing." So, I mean, in the dangerous world we are living, we have to apply compromise. Otherwise, we are going more and more in this fundamentalistic direction, which leads to more and more catastrophes. Secondly, we have to restore international law, respect for international law. That is the only way to cope with the migration and the problem related to it, namely ethnicity and identity. If we do not respect international law, if we do not respect how we handle migrant people based on human rights and the principles in the UN Convention, then we will face more and more problems. Thirdly, we have to tear down walls, not build new ones. I mean, history has told us that walls always come down. So we have to open up instead of building new ones. Look at what happened here in Europe. I lived only 5 minutes from the River Rhine in Strasbourg. This was a dividing line between France and Germany for years, for centuries. And the Germans always wanted to come over the Rhine and capture the territories there. And the French, they decided to, once and for all, to deal with this problem. Namely, they built the Maginot Line. You have heard about it in the school. The Maginot Line. Military through the whole borderline between Germany and France, so that Germany would never again try to go over the Rhine and capture France. But Hitler, he built the tanks and he drove them over the Ardennes in Belgium and captured Paris after 1 week. But the only Maginot Line that has kept the Germans out and not caused new wars is opening up the borderline, the Rhine. Today, you can travel over the Rhine by paying a ticket on the tram and go to Germany. And you don't. And it is true what Heyerdahl said. You don't see the border, and it doesn't exist in people's minds because there is no border any longer. So we have to do more to get more about this kind of politics. And we have to foster global human beings. Thor Heyerdahl was a true cosmopolitan. He understood his place in the world in a greater context. and we need to do everything we can, every one of us, to try to explain to people that you are not on your own, you are part of a global context. Yes, you belong to a religion, you belong to an ethnic group, but you also belong to humanity. And this is what actually, and I will wind up by referring to Amin Maalouf again. He wrote this, it's the best novel I ever read, namely Leo Africanus, where he told about the fact that Muslims and Jews and Christians could live peacefully on the Iberian Peninsula, develop trade. It was a peaceful time. So it is possible, but it is also possible what he wrote about also, namely that after a while politicians and leaders started to exploit the problems related to it. And after a while, Christians became an enemy for the Muslims and vice versa. So today, this kind of mentality, this kind of culture, less and less exists in the world. And by the way, as I'm a Norwegian, the Norsemen, that were actually the French that came from the Norse. So the Norsemen, they developed the same kind of culture in Italy, and Jews and Christians and Muslims, they worked hand in hand. And it was actually this culture of trade and cooperation paved the way for the Renaissance in Europe. And I think that we need a new Renaissance, a new way of thinking, a holistic way of thinking about the world, and we have to try to do our utmost everywhere to understand the others. And that was the main theme of Thor Heyerdahl. Understand the others, look upon the world from in the eyes of the others. The others are like us, more or less. They want to live their own lives, raise their own children, to have food, to have jobs. And we have to understand more of those who are living next to us. That is the only hope for the world today, I think.